Hello. I had promised my customers I would make a video that shares some kind of quick and easy ways to tell if your gemstones that you have or that you're purchasing are 100% natural or if they are lab created. And it may sound like I'm saying real versus fake, and that's not at all what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with a lab created stone. I just want you to know the difference. And when I say lab created versus natural, and when I say natural, I mean they've mined it out of the ground and then it's been hand cut, hand polished, hand drilled, and hand strung if it's on a string. When something's lab created, gemstone anyway, they generally will take some of the stone, generally a lower quality part of that stone, and kind of grind it up and put it into a powder and mix it with other stabilizers and chemicals and dyes and things, and then it will go into a mold the same way they make a glass bead. So it goes into a mold and then a rod goes right through it to make the hole. And so in fact they use all the same molds and processes in China that they've always used to make glass beads. They now use that same one to make their gemstones. And so the difference is there's only a percentage of that natural stone in a lab created stone, as opposed to it being 100% natural. How much of a percentage, you'll never know. How much is in there, how much of it is the natural, it really doesn't matter. It's lab created or it isn't. It's natural or it isn't, But I want to give you some easy ways that you can just eye it. These aren't scientific or technical, but just some layman's ways that you can glance at something and have a really good idea. It's not always 100% accurate, but but pretty accurate. So here's some prehnite. These are lab created prehnites. Here's some faceted chunky green garnets that are natural. And I'm sorry again, it's such a dreary day here in Tacoma, but we're going to do the best we can here. So a lab created stone, again, means it was put into a mold, and so each one is perfect. When you're looking at all the beads driven on a strand, they're all perfect. They're all perfectly the same size and shape, and even if there's facets, all the facets are very smooth and they're all the same on each bead, right? Because they were done in a mold as opposed to being cut. A natural stone, especially in these little chunky stones, clearly each bead is slightly different. Each little piece of the stone is slightly different shape and size. The facets or cuts on them all done by hand, so they're all a little different on each one. So they're going to not be necessarily kind of perfect looking. And that's really my whole goal here, is because lab stones can be created to look like the most high quality version of that stone that would cost thousands and thousands of dollars, but it's not actually 100% natural of that stone. So something like these little lab amethysts, again, I know it's dark here, it's hard to tell, but these are solid purple. If this was a real amethyst, the strand would be thousands of dollars to have that quality of amethyst. And so that's kind of my issue, is I want people just to know what they're purchasing when they do. So that's the one way to tell, is consistency of size and shape. The inclusions in here, the veining or banding, that lends itself to have some of the stone. Like I said, lab stones are meant to have some of the real stone in there. So it's nice when you can see that in there. It doesn't always have it, but they do tend to try to do that with lab created stone, so you can see some of it. It looks more natural that way. But it can be created also in a lab. So if I'm looking at, let's see, here's a strand of lab amazonite. Right, so the whole thing, each bead, same shape and size, perfectly, each facet done perfectly on each bead. All the color varies a little bit, which is nice. that lends itself for me to believe there is Amazonite in this lab-created stone. The dyes, though, can fade over time. This is another lab-created Amazonite. Some of this is getting lighter. Some of the dye is settling in the holes. This collection that I'm working on is on average of 15 to 20 years old. And so some of these stones have been around for a while. Here's a strand of pink opal that are 100% natural. And you can tell that by how different and kind of rough all these are as compared to each other. And so they're all like a coin shape that's center drill or side drill, but they're all slightly different thicknesses, different colors. And it would be easy to look at this and go, oh my God, what a crappy strand of pink opal. I don't think that. It's a lower quality of one, I think. Oh my God, look at all this beautiful natural pink opal. How stunning. So, and special, right? So there's an example. Here's some cut citrine, right? So beautiful. Again, this little kind of oval cut, but they're all different. Well, they're all meant to be an oval faceted. They're all still a little different shape from each other. All the facets are, slightly different from bead to bead. Same on this amethyst. So here's a beautiful. This is maybe a higher quality one. So the shapes are the beads are a little more consistent to each other, right? So it's just more time is put into them, and it's cut in where there's more clarity to the stone. The quality of stones is a whole separate video, but these are all handmade. You can still, if you would see them personally, you can see that they're all slightly still a little different from each other, but more consistent and still completely beautiful. This is a strand of Peruvian blue opals. Very obvious that they're, different from each other, but the same quality in that they just have a hint of that blue. It's not been mined where a lot of the rich blue color is, but kind of on the outside of the stone. I love opal, because it feels like amber. It feels so kind of light. Here are some lower quality strands of some rose quartz and some more citrine. Again in ovals, but they're all different sizes and things. So it's a lower quality strand, but still 100% natural. Naturally cut and then polished into that shape, drilled, and then strung. So consistency to shape and size to each other is just one of the most easiest ways to tell the difference. The next way is what the beads are strung on. Now, this is not always a 100%, but most of the time. In India, again, because these are made in factories, right? Most gemstones they're not actually mined in India. They're mined in other countries, Africa and Russia and what have you, and then sent to India for the processing. They're sent to India because it has cheaper labor and all the factories all ready to do all the cutting and polishing and drilling, etc. And so because they're all natural, they've always, since time began, strung them on cotton that matches the stone that will help enhance the color. So the rose quartz are strung on pink, the citrine is strung on gold, the prehnite is strung on green, because it helps enhance the color and make it look better, right? So instead of dye, we've just used a colored thread instead, where the gemstones that are strung or that are lab created in China are always strung on a plastic, like nylon type material. And they put their rounds, they make rounds in Hong Kong too that I've had, that will be on this really cheap plastic, wire. It's just inexpensive and easy to use. So that's why they string it on there and there's no color. So, they don't have to worry about that. It's just one of the sure ways to tell a lab created stone from one that's made in India. And the next way is hole size. So like I was saying before, when they started, they've always made glass beads in China and using the same molds and rods. And they started doing these lab created gemstones using the same molds and rods. And so the rods are a little bit larger, make a larger hole. Well, in India, because they're done by hand, they use the thinnest possible rod to get through that stone, right? They want it just to be, barely, enough to get through so that they don't crack the stone and it's easier to get through. So it makes a very small hole. And so that is one way to test as well, or to know. Here's some silk. Size 4 is a smaller size. Size 6 is larger. So your lab stones will always have the same size hole as glass or crystal, whatever. If you can see through that hole, to the other side, it's a big hole, I'm trying to get it on camera. There you go. Right, so if you can see that hole and see through it, it's big for a bead. So this size 6 silk, right, is going to go right through it. So, however, with our garnet, if we try this size 6, we find that little teeny hole first. It's not going to fit through, and it's not the needle. It won't go on a size 6. Some of them will even struggle to go on a size 4. Sometimes you'll need a size 2, right, for some of the small gemstones like the emeralds or even the rubies, right? But generally a size 4 will fit through most gemstones and most freshwater pearls, right? So hole size, what the strand is strung on, and consistency of shape and size are 3 of the easiest ways to kind of tell from just looking right at them. Now, just because a bead is round does not mean it's lab created. These are natural tourmaline, and they're round, but a bead could be polished round, but they're not perfectly consistent to each other. The holes are a little wonky. It's a lower quality tourmaline. You can also see how opaque it is compared to like a higher quality tourmaline. These are moss agates, right? So each one is perfect. The holes nice and large. So these are lab created. Each one is perfect. These little rondelles. I wish I had some more of these in strands, but these are lab created. Now, something like, just quickly, turquoise will always have to be manufactured now in a factory, and because the only turquoise left today is very unstable, right? It won't hold its shape. It's too brittle. So turquoise now has to have stabilizers and chemicals added to it, and because of that, there'll always be a color added to them as well. And so they have to be manufactured to get any kind of turquoise bead. So that's why before, when I talked about older pieces of Tibetan turquoise that are 100% natural, how special and how valuable they are, because that was a time when they could mine deeper into the stone and get more solid, secure pieces that wouldn't break, and they had a beautiful deep color, right? So having that Tibetan turquoise is really, really special. So let's see. So those are kind of the 3 kind of easiest ways. I wanted you to be able to tell that whether you're looking at your own stones or you're at a gem show. And again, mostly at gem shows, you're only going to find lab created stones from China now. They started creating them in the kind of mid 2000s and doing this process to create more and more of them. And slowly, right, then they started coming out and producing a less expensive stone, I should say. And people like things that are less expensive. And so by the time my last trip to India to buy gemstones was almost a decade ago, so 2017. And at that time, several hundred Indian factories had been closed, put out of business because of the Chinese lab stones that are kind of taking over. And so that's almost all you'll see now at gem shows, because it's readily available and there's not as many Indian stones available anymore because they're just not in business anymore. And so it's heartbreaking. And if you ask a vendor, are these real? Is this real Amazonite? Yes, they're going to say yes, and they're not lying. Ideally, there is some real Amazonite. You don't know how much, what percentage, or anything, but they're not lying. But are you asking, are they 100% natural with no synthetic interaction? That they probably don't know. To be kind of honest, I mean, but the answer would be no. That's not true. But that is again why these estate sales that we're doing and my customers' collections. I went to India between 2000 and 2017, so for almost 20 years, buying these beautiful natural stones that I had no idea at the time would eventually be rare and actually, obsolete. It's not the word I'm searching for, but something like chrome dioxide is completely mined out. Now you cannot find it anymore. So that's why the stones that my customers have when I'm doing these estate sale collections it's so important, and they're so special, right? Again, so look at these beautiful rubies, right? I'm sorry, it's so dark again today. These are all tip drilled, but they're all slightly, it is graduated, but they're still all slightly different shapes. One's fatter, one's thinner, and that's just the beauty of them being natural. And these are polished beautifully, right? Like that's a skill unto its own, just like cutting and facets. And then of course there's that beautiful imperial topaz, right? All completely natural. You can see that each, I mean, when you can see each up close, each one is just slightly different. Even though they're all tip drilled, slightly different shapes, slightly different colors with all these beautiful color variants, and just beautiful. Mother Nature is spectacular in her, colors. And even the little, we used to have tons of these natural rondelles in other stones, in sapphires and rubies and things. And the quality of the stone, that's a whole other video, but these have a very good clarity to them. You can still see some of the little black that would be in the stone naturally, but it has a beautiful clarity to them with this gorgeous dark green color. And I finished off all these. I mentioned that in another video too, so that you can wear them as is or do whatever you want, with them. But I could talk about this forever and other variants of them, but I want you to know what you have in your collection or what you're purchasing if you're at gem shows or purchasing even on my estate sales, and just realize how special these natural stones are and how beautiful they are, and that they'll last forever, right? They're not going to fade or die or anything. They're just going to become more valuable. And so that's, again, I just think having the privilege to work with some of my customers' collections, it's so special. So I really love it. So thank you for joining me. I'll put this video on YouTube, and so if you're not familiar, I'll put links below to our website and ways you can get signed up. We do the estate sales in person now, but we also put them online. And very soon I'll have a marketplace that's going up that will feature only these older vintage, I call them vintage, but older special pieces that we carried at my shop, for 30-some years. So thank you again, and sparkle brightly like the star that you are. Mwah! Peace.